what's behind the productivity gap in construction? In season 1 of The Power of Construction, we sat down with leaders to discuss this very topic and get their take on what they think is really behind the lagging productivity. And today, we're going to look back at those interviews, highlight some of the best conversations, sound bites that we heard from our guests. So welcome to The Power of Construction. I am Sasha Reed.
And I'm Kris. And in season 1, we had the opportunity to speak to a lot of really, really great guests. And they brought a ton of insights to the podcast. So today we want to revisit some of those moments in the first episode of season 2. So let's jump right in.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of talk about the guests that we spoke to, I think we should talk about how long you and I have been talking about wanting to have a podcast.
Yeah, it's been a decade plus that we've been talking about doing this, so it's exciting that we're already here.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone knows that, but this is something I think you and I are super passionate about, which is how do we take what was the most magical piece of, when you and I were both coming up in the industry, we traveled all over the U.S., going to conferences, speaking at conferences, and the best part of that whole experience was at the bar.
Yeah, it was the conversations.
Yeah, exactly. When, everyone's speaking session was done for the day and everyone was just hanging out in the bar and having a conversation. And I just think of the analogy of iron sharpens iron. Everyone was just hungry, humble, smart, coming together and sharing their ideas. And there was oftentimes we didn't agree with each other.
Probably more often than not.
Yeah, exactly. And just having these really fantastic dynamic conversations. And I often equated it to the stock market, and that, your innovators in the company are your day traders or your traders. And if you don't send them to a conference where they can go and have conversations with other innovators, you're not trading in the active market. You're not putting your capital where it needs to be. And here we are, 10, 15 years later, and we get the chance to finally sit down and have some of those conversations and really democratize that experience. And we're in different places than we were 15 years ago, too, in our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best part about all of this is that we're having this opportunity to bring these conversations to the rest of the industry, right? They're not limited to the bar at the JW or, what happened at Bluebeam Extreme or wherever it is that we were having these conversations. We're now putting them on the stage so that others can learn from them, others can take advantage of those, and really trying to follow the lead of some of these great leaders that we've brought on the podcast. So, in season 1, we really talked about why is construction productivity lagging, right? The construction's growth rate from the recent McKinsey report needs to double by 2040. I mean, we have a ton of top line growth that is projected in our industry. We need to keep up with it, but not only do we need to keep up with it, we need to make sure that we're still profitable while we do it, which is really, really important. And we've got some learnings from our guests in season 1 on how they're doing some of those things well. I think a few takeaways that I have is, you need to invest in your people. There's no doubt about that. We hear that oftentimes. And there's a lot of innovation happening, but it's about how you deploy that innovation, right? It's about how you lean into the people inside of your organization to allow them to solve these problems in unique ways, whether it's leveraging data, whether it's using technology, or maybe it's in investing in your business and how you build the culture around that. And so, they are really speaking to how they are addressing some of these challenges around productivity, the labor shortage, digital transformation in these episodes, and they all found a way to overcome them and to continue growing. So, Sasha, what were some of your big takeaways from season 1?
Yeah, and I'll double down on that. I think when we first asked the question around, and you know me, I love a good root cause analysis. Like, what's behind the thing that is the thing, and what's really at the heart of what this challenge is. And that was one of the things that I think I walked away with is, I've been in the technology space now for over 15 years. I consider myself to be a bit of a data nerd. It fuels a lot of the storytelling that I engage in, but I don't think I understood over the last 15 years how much data we've been able to capture, and still how unstructured it is. It's a little bit of therapy here. That we've applied technology to all of these business processes, with still more to grow. But I don't think I really understood that we have all this data, but we still haven't harnessed it in the right ways. That's still a missing puzzle piece, or maybe not a missing piece, but it's still something that keeps leaders up at night, which is, I've spent all this money on technology. I'm starting to invest more in my people. Where's my ROI I was promised? How is this really transforming the business? And so that really stuck out to me this season. Was we have everything we need. Now it's that next level of how are we organizing it? How are we structuring it? Where does it live in the business? Who's in charge of thinking about creating that data lake? And we heard that from so many guests. And then the second piece is, and anyone who knows me and knows the conversations I've been having in industry is not going to be surprised, but innovation is tied directly to your culture. So much of what construction has done to be successful over the last century has been passed down set of skills, decisive leadership, grit, perseverance. These are the things that have really helped construction to be as sustainable as it is, going through all the different economic swings that it's gone through, upturns, downturns. But we're in a different era. We're in a different time and space. And when I think about how much data was talked about and how much we're listening to some of these leaders speak to how they're structuring it and harnessing it, I realized there's a big culture component there. That means they're going to need to make sure that they have teams that aren't afraid to test, they're curious, that the business has some resiliency for testing. And so I think that was the piece that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, there's no doubt that in order to be successful in the future, people are going to have to do things differently.
Yeah, totally.
And that means they're going to have to take a different approach to data. I think challenging our people, not just to think about how do we collect it, but how do we actually put it to work for us. Yeah. And I know it's really easy for us to lean on our experience and our gut, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But we need to become more data driven, right? And that is as much of a cultural shift as it is a technology shift in our industry, for sure.
Yep. And I think our first guest who I want to look back on is, he just embodies this in every way possible. You and I know Todd, Wynne, Chief Innovation Officer for Rogers O'Brien. We've both known him for a really long time. I joke about the Google Glass that I swore I'd never put a pair of Google Glass on, but Todd got me to put the glasses on, and yeah, I still have the video. But Todd was not afraid to try new things. He was not afraid to think about how he was curious. He really leaned in with curiosity. So on the episode where we had Todd on, he really hit on something that I think is essential to the conversation that we're having. And it's really about his curiosity becoming a part of that culture of Rogers O'Brien. And as Chief Innovation Officer, he's almost as much around defining and finding and trying and applying technologies as he is around to define the culture. Let's hear what he said around that.
What my people at RO are very tired of hearing me say is be obsessed with the problem, be obsessed with the desired outcome. And if we live there, then we absolutely will move the needle.
Yeah, and Sasha, what I love about this quote, right, is when you're in the construction industry, every day is filled with a different problem.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And so there's so much for you to really lean into and really dig into these different problems that you are faced with every single day. But oftentimes we're talking about technology and we're talking about changing the way that we work, and people are like, oh, well, I'm going to go and just use this technology to do this thing. But what they really need to do is they really need to deeply understand the problem that they're actually trying to solve before they pick the solution. And I think Todd is really embodying that and driving that forward at RO, because he's saying, hey, we need to understand this problem better than anybody else does before we figure out how to go and solution for it. But that's also what's making them able to come up with innovative solutions and to drive innovation in ways that maybe nobody else is able to do, because they do truly understand what is at the root cause of those challenges that they're facing.
You also bring up something I think is really important to note, which is it's not just about the young people who have these great ideas of how they want to do something differently. He talked in that statement around, really understanding and knowing the problem. And so that means engaging with executives who have been doing this for 30-something years, who have this muscle memory around how to tighten the belt when you need to, how to push through when there's blockers. And so I think it really touches on what I hope we really start to unpack in season 2, which is all hands need to be on deck. We need the generation who's had the time and the experience of delivering projects to be a co-creator as we look at the data we've created and how we're going to structure that and how that's going to transform the business processes. It really needs to be a two-way discussion. And what Todd has really unlocked here, and he's probably been thinking and doing this for the last 10 years, is that's how you attract the next generation.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that's pretty obvious, is that, or it seems obvious, right? That people want to work at companies where they can make a difference.
Yep.
They want to work at
100%.
places where they can come up with new ways of doing things. They want to be able to challenge. And especially the generation that's coming into this industry right now, they don't have many of the inhibitions or aversions to technology or aversion to AI, because they're using it all the time, right?
Digital natives.
And they are so native to the things that we struggle to adopt sometimes in this industry, that they just think differently. And it's exciting for them to think about the problems that we actually could go solve. You have to be willing to listen to them.
Yep.
And that's what will keep people around. It's also the thing that will help you bring on the best and brightest as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about, let's just say finance as an industry, they recruit so heavily, but they're not shying away from saying, these are our biggest challenges. And the finance industry especially is like, break things.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
They're going to some of those top schools and they're saying, hey, we want you to break things. We want you to push the bounds, to try new means and methods, because from a finance perspective, the profit exists within a little bit of chaos. And so I think we in construction need to do a little more to be less, I'm only going to talk about my successes. I'm only going to talk about the things that I'm getting right, because then we're boring. We're not even exposing them to the challenges that we have, so that they say, I want to go in that industry. I think of my niece and my nephew-in-law, and I think about conversations I have with them around the industries that excite them. And it's where there's a lot of green space, where there's, old ways of doing things and starting to innovate and hacking hardware and hacking processes. And so I think we need to do a little better job of that if we really want to attract that next generation, is let's expose them to some of those challenges. Now, the next guest that we had talk about being able to attract a diverse workforce and creating a culture of innovation. Nancy Novak, Chief Innovation Officer for Compass Datacenters. She's the host of Extending Ladders podcast, which is a podcast that she's done specifically fostering information and insights for women in construction. She's another leader who really saw innovation as a the culture's the vehicle to really kind of put innovation into the company. And she talked about how it's essential to solve complex challenges. And she mentioned on there a lot around how diversity for her is not a tick box kind of exercise. They're building data centers. They're literally doing a lot of things that haven't been done before and dialing into almost a manufacturing-like operation of the business. They can measure so accurately if they're on or off target. And one of the things that she talked about was how this generational shift, where we have this diverse workforce, all these different generations, and she gave us a little bit of a heads up as to what she sees AI transforming an industry. Let's hear what she had to say.
But the workforce is the last thing AI is going to replace, okay? And we are in a crisis of an aging workforce. We are in a crisis of a workforce that, desperately needs to replenish itself and have that diverse perspective.
Yeah, and this was such a good conversation. And when we talk about AI, I think everybody's natural is, oh, how's this going to affect my job? And I think the reality of what Nancy's trying to say here is like, we need people who know how to leverage the AI. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should lean into it. And they're going to bring a different way of asking questions. They're going to have a different way of working with the AI to help us really drive new business impacts and new business success that we haven't seen before. And it's that workforce that we need to attract them to this industry. And they're probably going to come from some non-traditional places. And so we need that talent being brought into the industry who's willing to challenge the way that we think, that's willing to work alongside of the AI and not just be something that is afraid of what it might do to their role because, hey, we have much bigger challenges to solve here.
And I think we need, I mean, I'm biased because I've chosen technology, going from construction into technology. I really saw working in the technology industry as a way of opening up the opportunity to build a career in this industry. And Kris, you know, that's why I'm super passionate about it with my story. But this idea of how she's looking at innovation and diverse perspectives, solving some of those big business problems. Nancy doesn't have a problem recruiting.
Yeah.
Nor does Compass Datacenters have a gender inequality gap. They're pretty well balanced as an organization. And I think a lot of that goes to the intentionality of leadership, saying we really see having as many hands, all hands on deck, applying themselves to solve these problems as being our differentiator.
At the core of it all, they want the most innovative and the best ideas, and they don't care where they come from. And they want to make sure that they're bringing all of that to the table so that they can think of ways to build faster, build better, change the status quo.
And the amazing thing about Compass Datacenters is because of who they are, they have data. They can actually measure. Are we moving the needle? Are we not? And so I'm excited to see what's going to come from that segment of our industry moving forward. So talking about data centers, that brings to mind just the massive opportunity sitting in front of construction as an employer right now. And I was so excited to have this guest on our show, true celebrity in our industry. I would say probably the official spokesperson for construction and for the trades, and I'm talking about Mike Rowe, Emmy-winning creator, host of Discovery Channel's Dirty Jobs, also the founder of Mike Rowe Works, which is a scholarship foundation. And I remember I had pulled stats before sitting down in his interview, and I was saying how much money they had pulled, how many views, and he corrected each stat as he should, with a massive amounts more money has been actually deployed through his Mike Rowe Works scholarship program, even more views. But he brought something in that conversation to focus, which I consider Mike Rowe to be kind of adjacent, so third-party perspective. But he brought a statement that was pretty shocking to really bring this talent crisis for construction's employers, really bring that into sharp focus. Let's hear what he had to say.
We've got about 8 million jobs that are currently open that don't require a 4-year degree. A lot of those jobs are in your industry, but they just don't get a lot of love.
And Sasha, I mean, it's crazy to think that there's 8 million jobs out there that either people don't know about, they don't think of them as great career opportunities. You know, and a throwback to when Josh Bone was on the podcast earlier this season, he said, you know, the American dream is alive and well.
Totally.
There's so much opportunity for folks. And so we need to, as an industry, to really we're starting to see the needle move, right? On how we are taking the driver's seat and marketing ourselves and telling our story and say, hey, you know what? This is an amazing industry to be in, right? All of us that are in it, we all know it, right? But for some reason, we're afraid to tell anybody. You know, we only talk about the things that are hard. We don't ever talk about the things that are great and the things that we actually do build and the difference we're making around the industry and just in the world that we live in. And so I think now's the time is that we need those skills. We need those people. There's huge opportunity for them to come into our industry. And even if it's your second or your third career, please come. We need that
Totally.
diversity. We need that different experience in our industry, because we have great paying jobs that are on some of the coolest projects all around the world. And we need more people who want to lean into this industry and literally build the future.
Totally. And there was something that conversation ended up going to, which was this idea of an employee-owned company, or ESOP. And on his podcast, everyone has a podcast these days, which is great. It's like getting a conversation with somebody, even if you're virtually so far apart. But his podcast, he interviewed one of his sponsors for his podcast, who was an owner of a trade company. And essentially, they invited Mike to come out the day that the owner decided to convert the company into an ESOP and to make every employee a shareholder. And so Mike and I had a chance to talk about, is this the thing we've been waiting for? The thing that kind of creates the right environment for employees to have a stake of ownership, a little more of that entrepreneurial spirit in the company that really balances out what comes into the company, how that's reinvested in upskilling and training people, and the things that they do and the work that they provide. I mean, construction is hard work, but this creates a net new value in addition to being able to say, I helped build that, which is typically the core value of somebody who chooses construction, is they want to be able to say, I helped to do that. But in addition to that, it's a sense of, I'm intrinsically motivated to get this work done well, because then I benefit from it as well. I get reinvested in. And so I think what we uncovered in that micro conversation was, we're starting to see that needle move, because we had, I think, at least 3 or 4 guests who we talked to, who what we know to be those headwinds of construction, the talent crisis, retaining talent, net new skills, they're solving those problems, and they're not experiencing the headwind. And so there's a solution here.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And I think some of those people who are thinking ahead are really starting to make a big dent in that labor challenge.
I want to go to, I don't know if this is, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know if this was your favorite guest, but I want to think about this now when we think about the talent we're bringing in and potentially getting outside perspective to come into construction at this time when we really are at a transition phase. And I'm talking about Jit Kee-chin, the Chief Technology Officer for Suffolk. I believe Jit Kee was one of the first data experts to come into construction and really bring her background from MIT, and she shares a lot about the different degrees she has and the different focuses of studies. But she was the first one to come in our industry and really provide that outsider's perspective and apply that to the business of construction. And she spoke a lot about, ironically, even though her expertise is data, of the role people play in innovation as a company. And she talked to why change management is so hard. And she gave us some really good insights into what you need to be focused on if you really want to change your organization. Let's hear what she had to say.
And a lot of the real world change is driven by people, right? So how do you take a decision analytically often, right? Like how you, to decide the path, you got to look at the factors, analyze the market forces, etc. But then how do you win hearts and minds? How do you set a direction? How do you get people to follow you? And then how do you systematically drive that organizational change?
Yeah, I mean, you all know this. Anyone who's watched the podcast knows this. I'm a giant data nerd. I love this stuff. So getting the opportunity to sit down and talk through this with Jit Kee was just a happy place for me, right? And I think what she's saying here is, like, the data will take you so far, but getting people to adopt and understand how to change their decision-making process is the hard part, right? And then doing that at scale. So, you can put all the scientific rigor behind data that you want, but it's the mind shift that needs to happen on our industry to say, hey, we need to be more data-driven. I can't just rely on my 30 years of experience. I have to rely on the collective experience of all the data that we have to make better decisions. And so we have to think about, how do we motivate the industry to make this change? And I think that, we're all very, very competitive right? And
Yep.
so we want to
Totally.
be better than the next. We want to be more profitable. We want to return to our employees. And so we know that some things have to change in order to make this a reality. And so I think, we always love the idea of how to ask great questions. So that's awesome. Now we have all of this data that we can sit down with and start to get some of the answers that we want. And that's a great place to be, but we need that mindset to be more prevalent in our industry than maybe it has been traditionally.
Yeah, and she did a very good job of even saying, even telling us a little bit about her background, her childhood, what makes her curious and kind of leading. She had what I'll consider a non-traditional path into construction, and I think that was incredible because it spoke to that it is going to take a different approach to how we're looking at the business and how we're really supporting the people who do that work. One of the things that and this was really important to me when we started off season 1, I wanted to really start that episode with kind of, I'll call it an external adjacent perspective. So we had Peter Tateishi, who is the CEO of AGC of California, and we had Josh Bone, who is the executive director for Electri. And we had them on to give us like a readout. What's the readout from, we're looking at this from specialty contractor to general contractor, owners not necessarily represented here, but I think we wanted the lens to be on how are we doing? What's the state of construction? What were the things that they shared that stuck out to you? What were some of the statistics that they shared?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stats were pretty amazing to think about, right? That only about 10% of projects are scheduled or finished on time and on budget. We lose $97 billion of cost is eaten by specialty contractors. That's the one that blew me out of my chair in a way because we know that there's a lot of money lost. I think it's something like $40 billion is lost due to not great productivity processes. But to think that even more than that, $97 billion is being eaten by the trades and eaten by the specialty contractors, that was really an eye-opening moment for me because that is what's driving the supply chain and driving some of the behaviors that we have out in the market today that really could make a big difference if we could change that perspective.
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm a firm believer, if you measure where you are and if you know where you are, then you know if you're moving forward or going backwards. And I think although those numbers are really painful to hear, especially I think about the careers you and I have dedicated our careers coming out of the industry, going into technology with this optimistic view that tech serves and saves and solves. And some of these numbers are not where I think we expected us to be as an industry. So I think it's important we're honest with ourselves and we have this information now so that we can say, okay, now we know where we're at. Let's leverage this are we moving the needle in the right direction? Even with that, Peter gave us one of the best taglines and one of the best quotes, I think, about construction as an industry. Let's hear what he said.
I mean, the tagline for me is just Industry 1, right? We are the first industry. We are the foundation upon which every other economy is built. And so we need to own that bigger, prouder, and understand that we are Industry 1.
And I think the key here is we have to recognize that construction is really kind of the center of just about everything around us. And we have to not only just demonstrate how vital it is, but own how vital and valuable that the workforce and the industry is to everything else. We oftentimes talk about we build the world around us. We do. Nothing happens in the world without some construction happening, right? A building has to be built for a research to be done to potentially cure cancer, right? A lab has to be refit out in order to go and adjust that. There's so many things that we contribute to. And so I think when we think about giving the time and space to allow contractors to think about how they perform projects, right? To build better contracts, to refine their means and methods, we need to really invest in the workforce, but also the ways that we can innovate and build better in the future.
Exactly. And I think that's the season 2. I mean, a little bit of spoiler. That's really, really what we want to lean into here is if we've identified what some of the root cause analysis is to why productivity is lagging in construction, we've started to identify some of the things, and then we can start doubling down on those and really say, okay, this is where we need to be innovating. And that reminds me of our next guest who blew me away. I just remember sitting there thinking, she runs triathlons and she has like multiple degrees. That's not really what kind of she focused on, but in everything else that she's doing, I was like, wow, this is just an incredible leader. And I'm speaking of Samantha Cook, who is the CFO for Brinkman Constructors. Brinkman's a $1.3 billion national general contractor. And they are 100% employee owned. So again, talking about that ESOP. But what Sam articulated in our conversation was that transformation is 100% what the businesses should be focusing on. The roles, the focus of some of your executives, these are going to need to shift and these are going to need to change. And she gave us some really great insights into how that role of CFO is shifting. Let's hear what she had to say.
And so as the CFO, typically that wasn't something that, 20, 30 years ago was expected. It was expected you were going to manage cash flow, that you were going to make sure that you had the banker relationships and you were going to have these things figured out. And you still do. But you also have to make sure you're in the community. You have to make sure you understand what the product is. You have to make sure that you know what are the things that your partners need. And for me, even things like understanding the schedule of the project, understanding the technology, the change orders, make sure that you know your product and you know the differences between each market.
Yeah, I think the thing I loved and really took away from Sam when we talked to her was the role of a CFO is changing. The role of financial systems, financial process in our businesses is evolving, right? And the technology is coming along, but are the people coming with it, right? We have to think about these things differently. Back to data again, my favorite topic, but she really said, like, I had to really think about what type of data initiatives that I wanted to implement. And she actually didn't start with things that were inside of her remit in finance.
No.
Because she knew that she needed to find things that she could get others to buy into to build the capital inside of the company to go do the things that she wanted to. And so, I think her concept of, hey, you have to grasp the value of data. It's hard. It's really, really, really hard to let go of things that you know and the tools that you use today, right?
Yeah.
But if we can show how data and new next generation tools can evolve the way that we are solving our day-to-day challenges, we can really get that buy-in. And I think we can make not just small steps, but leaps forward.
I don't know if you noticed when she shared with us how many different parts of the business are under her as CFO, like parts of the business I normally wouldn't have expected. And I think that's just a byproduct of her ambition and her vision. She has such vision for where she wants to take the company. And I don't remember if she said this on camera or if it was before we started rolling, but she's like, my dream, I want a data lake. That's my dream. And I just remember thinking like, ooh, that's pretty geeking out right now. I don't think I've ever heard anybody in construction say, I want a data lake. That's my dream.
I mean, you could probably ask my wife and she would tell you I probably wake up in the morning and dream about dashboards. So like, I can relate.
And so one of the things that I think is my biggest takeaway from the conversation we had with her was she's in the position she's in, and she said it, I'm a millennial. The way I think is just different, and the way that I feel about technology is I'm pretty comfortable with it. And when the business had a moment of, hey, we're gonna need to update systems and we're gonna need to figure this out, she raised her hand. She was like, I'll do it. I totally wanna do it. I know so many women in our industry who have accelerated their careers just simply by leveraging technology to get to the heart of what the business needs, and she did that expertly. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about Jennifer Downey, who joined us on the podcast. She's the director of ESG at Turner Construction. They had just published their first ESG report, and I went into that conversation thinking I had a pretty good sense of what ESG was. Environmental, sustainability and governance, and environmental, social, and governance. And so I felt like I had a decent understanding. She really demystified it for me. And one of the things that she talked about was don't overcomplicate it. Like the reporting and setting goals is complicated enough. But don't overcomplicate it. This is a natural progression of our culture, of the things that we as Turner have done to overcome our headwinds. I want to let her share her quote that she shared with us on the podcast.
ESG is really an extension of our culture. There are so many components of our culture that we're bringing together that have existed for a long time, sort of the fabric of who we are as an organization. And so it was a really natural extension for us to take, add this layer of structure to our commitments and accountability and transparency, really building on something we've already had as a, core of who we are. And it's extremely important to our business and to our leadership team. Our leadership teams are directly involved.
Yeah, and so what was eye-opening for me here was, they weren't really doing anything new per se.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They were really leaning into the culture and the focus areas that they were already doing inside of the business, but putting a new sense of structure and rigor and accountability behind it. And, if you think about it in that realm and you really take a step back and go, yeah, we're already doing a lot of these things. We just need to be better at being really, really intentional about it. That I think puts a new lens on ESG for a lot of folks. And that was eye-opening for me, because I think I was probably one of those people who were in very much the boat as this is another thing we need to go do.
Yeah, compliance.
Yep.
Yeah, checking the box. I will predict. I think what Turner's doing here, having produced their first ESG report, because it does create transparency and accountability, I think this is going to be a major recruiting tool for them in the future, because this is wide open transparency. These are the things that we're doing. This is how it aligns to our environmental, social, and governance. Not perfect, not exactly where we want to be. There's a long road ahead of us, but this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I predict that type of motion as an employer will make them stand out. And that next generation who's coming up and saying, I want the things that I do, if I'm going to spend time away from the things I love, I want it to matter and I want it to have purpose. And I think they've done a really good job of creating a vehicle for communicating that purpose to the market.
And it comes back to what we were just saying earlier, right? People want to feel connected to the difference that they're making in this industry.
Exactly.
And this is a way for them to shine a spotlight on how they really, truly are living that, and that is part of their culture.
And this tees up. I've saved what I consider to be the best for last. I love all guests the same. Enjoyed speaking to them all the same. But I'm going to say, I think I really wanted to save this guest the best for last. And I'm talking about Cornelius Griggs, who's the CEO of GMA Construction. And he was our 2025 Groundbreaker Award winner. I did research on him before getting a chance to sit down with him and was thoroughly impressed, not only with his story and the success of his company, but for somebody who's so young, I'm showing my age now because I think he's probably mid-30s, and I'm like, he's so young. But for somebody who's so young, he was super intentional about what legacy am I leaving? And we have conversations with leaders all the time, and I'm have conversations with some leaders in their mid to late 50s, and sometimes legacy isn't even on their radar yet. They're so in the business. They're so in today and in what is my business doing and how am I trying to keep the lights on and how am I trying to maintain top line growth, but the bottom line growth is kind of declining. Like, how do I solve these problems? Cornelius Griggs was not only an impressive person, but he, to me, really, really represents what I think the leaders of the future are gonna need to be in the right mind space for. Let's hear how he described it.
And I hope that as leaders of organizations, we think about, what our impact is going to be when we're long gone from the industry. And when you take your resources and you invest in these underserved communities across the country, that becomes a legacy.
Yeah, I mean, Sasha, to sum it up, this is the type of leadership, this is the type of guest that we wanted to have on the podcast, right? Those who have taken a different approach and really solved some of the challenges that others are still struggling with. I mean, in our conversation on the podcast, he basically told us he doesn't have a labor shortage problem.
Totally. Exactly.
Which is like, for him to come out and say that, and he's saying that because I have people lining up that want to come work on these type of projects because they understand that we are a purpose-driven organization. And yeah, we're still here to grow. We're still here to profit. We're still here to grow the people inside of the business, but it's also at the service of something larger, right? And, you know, as those leaders are thinking about the legacy that they leave behind when they move on from a business, we have to think about how we are evolving the business and doing things differently so that it will live on long past, you know, that patriarch, that person who's been at the head of the business for a long time, and they need to lead differently in order to solve many of these challenges.
And I'll say Cornelius' story is exceptional in so many ways. His legacy is he's going back into the inner cities of Chicago to rebuild the cities and to create the infrastructure he wished he had. So as a ward of the state in foster care, he wished he had had the libraries. He'd wished he had had the healthcare centers. He'd wished he had had the physical structures around him that created the community that he wanted. And in following his desire for legacy and saying, hey, I'm going to invest in the inner cities and I'm going to rebuild in the inner cities, that has taken his business from $1 million to $100 million in less than 10 years. It has also created a $400 million backlog. So this isn't just doing good. This is about meeting a need, and there's a vacuum. He's leaning into that vacuum as part of his legacy, and it's showing in the numbers. I hope for those who are watching, if you haven't watched any episode, start with Cornelius, because it's going to make you feel pretty darn optimistic about the future.
Yep.
So with that, I think we've run out of time. I can see a flashing light telling me I've run out of time. And there's so many great episodes for you to watch. Go to procore.com/podcast. Check out the episodes. It's on YouTube. It's on all your streaming platforms. Give it a listen. Teaser, season 2 is coming up. And in season 2, we're going to talk about the Future State of Construction report that Procore recently launched. We're going to dive into that, and we're going to bring some expert minds together to have a conversation around this future vision of construction, and maybe have a little bit of a debate and a lively discussion around where we're headed as an industry. Yeah. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and please like, share, subscribe, and we'll keep bringing you the stories of leaders who are building our future and harnessing the power of construction.